So we can start. Now we are in a very interesting and crucial moment of our conference, as we have with us, as you can see already, Jaime Breilh, who is coming from Ecuador, and he's one of the leading figures in the critical approach of science, in the epistemology, and especially as he is also a leading member and militant, I can say, of ALAMES, the Association of Latin American Medical, the Association of the Latin American Association of Social Medicine. He's the first who put a long time ago the first question marks about, first of all, what social determinants are, and he put the idea, which today, of course, it's more or less dominant, actually, Jaime, no? That we cannot speak about the fragmented social determinants, but we have to see social determinants as a process which is much more synthetic than cutting out every determinant its own. So this was very important approach that enlightened us. And the other issue, which is going, of course, hand to hand to that, is that he is the person who started all this discussion of colonization of epistemology. And of course, he is leading the movement of decolonization of the epistemology, of the science, actually, regarding, of course, related with health, social medicine, and public health. So, as you understand, it is a very promising and interesting introduction that he's going to make with us. Unfortunately, he would not come with us, but Jaime, thank you very much for being with us. It's a great honor, first of all, great honor for us, and great pleasure to see you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I will share my presentation first.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, for me, it's a good morning. For you, it's a good afternoon or early night. From Quito, Ecuador, I'm very glad and very honored to be here participating in this very important meeting. I thank you very much for the opportunity. So I will go over with my presentation, and I have named it Critical Epidemiology in a Pandemic Civilization. And there is a subtitle of the presentation, which is Daring Ethical Science of All Voices to Face Rampant Health Inequity. Okay, so first of all, I would like to express a fraternal greeting on behalf of the team of the Centro de Investigación y Laboratorios en Salud Colectiva of our university, Andean University of Quito, of Ecuador, to all participants in this important conference. My thanks to the organizing committee for the opportunity to share some of our experience, and very especially to Ferid Aksu Tanik, the president of IAHPE, Elias Condolis, the vice president, and Alexis Benos, my dear friend and honorary president of this meeting. This presentation focuses mainly on the challenges of building an integral critical thinking, disputing ideas and methodology and conceptions of action, of praxis, that reproduce hegemonic power. I will start by placing this element of the 21st century as the health inequity in the 21st century in a pandemic civilization. This is the current context of our struggle for the people's health. And it is a moment of 4.0 extractivist capitalism as a challenge for science, a challenge for critical thinking, a challenge for new methodology and new domains of action in a world of extreme inequity. We live in the most dangerous and aggressive historical period of hyper-neoliberal capitalism, a moment of an era of global acceleration of unhealthy structural processes, incompatible with life and health, interwoven with an exponential growth of inequality. In the global South, it is an era of dismantling people's rights, sometimes elegantly and sometimes brutally. In short, the cancellation of the policies of the common good and the last remnants of the social pact. This is an era of hyper-neoliberalism. From a collective health perspective, it is a result of the exponential advance of a radicalized capitalism. We have used the prefix hyper, which denotes excess, to qualify a different stage of neoliberalism, in which extreme privatization and dismantling of rights are expanded through the intense acceleration of the processes of capital accumulation and its private concentration. This is made possible by the greedy use of technology of the fourth industrial revolution. In other words, a capitalism 4.0, where the interdependent processes of private wealth accumulation and massive social exclusion are accelerated and occupy new dimensions of life through an exponential growth of the productive force and the penetration of the extractivist process in new spaces in dimensions, opening capitalism to the nanospace, to the cyberspace, etc. So how did we arrive in this 21st century at the convergence of greedy, productivist uses of new technologies? Technologies are not the problem. We are all users of good technologies, of the good uses of technology. But I am speaking about the greedy, productivist uses of new technologies, which make possible accelerated capital accumulation. In the historical material background of this process, we find the acceleration of structural inequality. Thomas Piketty and his team have used the word hypercapitalism. This will mean that capital will continue to grow much faster than output and income. In simple terms, this regressive trend implies that the past will devour the future, in Piketty's and his team's words. And you can see the trend, the historical series, with inequality data showing that the gap between private capital income with respect to income and value of production that existed through the 20th century is becoming much larger. As you can see here in the graph, we are more or less at this moment, and things are getting even worse with time. The acceleration, the exponential growth of all the forms of inequality, of inequity are there. And of course, this acceleration, this 4.2 capital acceleration, implies an exponential growth of large private income, but unfortunately, precisely in this moment, a concomitant dismantling of rights. As you can see in this graph, this is the percentage, the growth of percentage of income of the 10% of wealthier people, and this is the graph of union membership, which has gone down broadly and in many countries. So we witnessed then the global collapse, not only of life and health in this 21st century, but also of ethics and human rights. And how did we arrive to this most aggressive extractivism? I will afterwards, you can take a look in this recording. You can go over this table that I'm going to present. I don't have time to stay in every detail of the table, but I ask you to see it afterwards, so you can understand how I am exposing this brief historical review on extractivism, extraction, and its acceleration. Here you have the timeline starting in the first industrial revolution of the 18th century, going to the second industrial revolution, the third and fourth, and then you find here that the material or productive force that is underlying in each of these periods it changes from the mechanization of work to mass production to automation, and then to productive virtuality at cyber and nanoscale with limited or no regulation supported by digital thinking, what has been wrongly called artificial intelligence. I can say afterwards that it is not intelligent and it's not at all artificial. But this 21st century is where I'm going to state at this moment, we find a globalized extractive systems in real time that operate globally in real time, convergence of cyber physical systems, technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. And in terms of the cumulative process of subsumption and production of life, we find that there is a cyber physical subsumption of thought, an algorithmic subsumption of the functioning of cities, of institutions, of the state even, and a cyber determination of life, broadly speaking, which puts in the center of this problem the algorithmic governance by artificial intelligence. So we have the system has converted the wonderful resources of technology in an acceleration of destructive productive forces. So agro-industrial, just to give an example, agro-industrial and mining monopolies are being globalized. Contamination in all its multiple forms of spaces, of food, of people, of workers, the multiple toxicity in workers, communities, ecosystem is on the run. Global land grabbing, the best land, not only in the South, but also even in the wealthy North and Europe, are being controlled by transnational land deals that can be followed by these systems like Man Matrix, almost in a 24-hour or 24/7 report. And this global land grabbing implies not only the control of land, but also the control of water, the control of genome, the control of many of the elements that make the reproduction. But in the South, in the global South, like in this case in Brazil, I'm using it as an example. I could perfectly use my country, Ecuador, also as an example of similar things. But in this wonderful study of Wanderlei Pignati and his group, they have studied the social sanitary, the social public health disaster and environmental disaster of agribusiness. And this is important to understand that very high-tech 4.0 high-tech agricultural production combines with slave labor, and of course, as always, there's a organized peasant resistance in Brazil as in other countries. But here, if you map this system of production in Brazil, which is the biggest country in South America, you find that this is a map of Brazil, and this atlas that was produced by Lombardi, a wonderful lady, a researcher of Sao Paulo that is now living in Europe. The use of pesticides is broad. The intoxication by pesticides, of course, is broad, and the defeat of maximum residue limits that are in European standards way lower have been risen because of to allow companies to accelerate even more. And look at the work analogous to slave distributed in Brazil. So we are finding high-tech, hyper-neoliberal production with slavery, which is probably present in all the same places. And of course, with all the elements of aerial spraying of pesticides by crops, certain crops like sugarcane, in this case in Brazil, which is the first producer of sugarcane in the world, you find that there is an enormous use of pesticides. But I'm giving you just bits and pieces of what is happening in this pandemic or syndemic reality, and you find a global pandemic obesity situation because of the globalization of obesogenic neoliberal diet, as Otero and his team have called it. And this globalization of the neoliberal diet, it makes part of a neoliberal or hyper neoliberal way of living and eating, modes of living. We cannot seriously understand the current 21st century epidemic of obesity and related chronic diseases without looking seriously at the global construct of the neoliberal diet. And I would say the neoliberal way of life, which is not only urban, it's also experiencing a turning point in the neo-rurality of capitalism. So this obesogenic diet is also a toxic neoliberal diet in which implies profound impacts and very dangerous impacts in the food system products and even in breast milk. So like in the dossier, which was produced in Brazil on the destructive expansion of agribusiness in the Brazilian reality, we have a translation in Spanish of this dossier members of the Congress need. And what we find, what was found by this very important research coordinated with the support of Abrasco and Fiocruz Brazil, and also of Abrasco, and with the participation of more than 30 universities, found that all throughout Brazil, the distribution of the sampling of food found that 28% of the samples had very dangerous contaminants. 35% had highly toxic components, and 37 were supposed to have only green, supposedly safe components of or presence of or contaminants of food. But don't forget that for many years, the producers said that glyphosate was green and was safe, no? And now what was said very strongly from many countries, especially Argentina, with Andres, with a marvelous research group of Universidad de Buenos Aires defined. And in this study, and we have found similar things in other countries, like in mine, up to 6 components of contaminants, of very dangerous contaminants, were present in breast milk of women in agricultural areas. So we're speaking of a process, and in Ecuador, this very important research about agrotoxics in Ecuador also shows the same thing. And it's a war on health, it's a war on population, not only of the producers that are directly exposed, but also the consumers that are having these diets. And dangerous pesticides in typical Ecuadorian dish has been proven. And so this is the point that I want to arrive to. This 21st century is a multiple crisis era of catastrophic expressions. And I underline 6 main interdependent expressions which occur or are generated by the same social historical matrix. First, a concentration of private wealth with massive social exclusion. Second, a widespread and global dismantling of healthy lifestyles or lifestyles that are health protective, with the emergence of a syndemic cycle in the 12th century. Not only pandemic, it is syndemic because it is the combination of all these destructive processes. Third, the authoritarian and populist construction of geopolitics and management. Fourth, the global unleashing and acceleration of catastrophic climate change, which is linked to the same elements, the same processes that generate the other elements that I have been speaking of, generate this catastrophic climate change. And what is very worrisome from the standpoint of universities, research centers, social groups which are researching the reality, is that there is an objective and ethical crisis of scientific technical knowledge in health. I'm going to speak about the problems of strategic ignorance that is built institutionally, that is institutionalized, planned systematic disinformation. So all this makes a very, very explosive, very dangerous situation for the peoples of the world. And this socioeconomic, this economic political situation is, of course, intertwined with the cultural elements of a civilization that is a support in terms of what Henri Lefebvre would have said, that space, social space, supports and is produced socially, but it also produces impacts in the social development. So there is a link also with culture and all these things that are happening. And Bolívar Echeverría, a very important philosopher, Latin American philosopher, has said that three elements of the civilization: a desacralization of Mother Nature, converting it into a continent of resources for profit; the secularization and corruption of politics; and the extreme consumerist individualism. So these are three cultural bombs that are really helping reproduce this material historical metrics that I have profiled. And in all this scenario, Cartesian health sciences produce the illusion of knowledge and plan ignorance in hegemonic epidemiology. For instance, here comes the epidemiologist. I'm an epidemiologist, and I'm going to use my own field of work to illustrate this reasoning that I'm presenting here. This is to say, or to support the argument that a truly transformative and objective epidemiology, which is the diagnostic hand of social medicine, of collective health, of public health, epidemiology, a truly transformative and objective epidemiology can only be achieved by reforming the epidemiology of power and functional academy. When I say functional academy, I mean academic institutions that reproduce the science of power and that have a connection, a umbilical cord to the structures of power of the countries. We need an epidemiology that breaks away from the moorings to represent all interests and penetrate reality, especially now to reveal the processes behind the current global catastrophe of life and health. So it is not possible to contribute to this deconstruction and reconstruction that we need to push forward in the academic field and of the failed health system and develop a new scientific epidemiological model with patches and critical words used in studies and presentations and reports that only use critical reasoning marginally, but the essence of its epistemological, theoretical, philosophical construction is Cartesian. So this is one of our struggles that I need to insist in some basic concepts and ethical and epistemological challenges that we are facing. I am based in this presentation of my last book, which was published by Oxford University Press, Critical Epidemiology in the People's Health. For the Spanish-speaking comrades, I have the good news that the translation to Spanish is ready and will be published in the next 2 or 3 weeks, published by an agreement and a co-edition of my university with the National University of Mexico, UNAM, and Claxo, the Center for Social Sciences, Latin American Center for Social Sciences, Claxo of Argentina. So in this book, what I'm saying is we have to produce a movement in the critical thinking world of transforming knowledge, and of course transforming the notions and the prescriptions of action. We have to transform this Cartesian linear theory in a theory of complexity. We have to transform a linear empiricist methodology, a peak of the iceberg logic, in a methodology of a metacritical, transdisciplinary, intercultural construction of knowledge, and a philosophy of praxis which is functional, unicultural, academicist, in a philosophy of integral transformative practice, which is radical, neo-humanist, ecosophic, non-patriarchal in its essence. So the different forms of entry and enunciation of science and its methodology have to be brought out. And from the hegemonic Cartesian perspectives, some myths or elements of systematic scientific ignorance have been reproduced and constructed. Research and practice myths, like the one that says having good specialized training and mastery of the instruments is the key issue. Only that. 2, having clarity and mastery of politics is the main key, with that you make any action and thought a consistent transformative act. Or the worst of the myths, to be practical, the important thing is to be in action, and in this way, products are produced. Policy and scientific theory are two important but separate things. Having a robust method for research and a space of action that generates products is what counts. The rest I leave to theoreticians and methodologists. This is absolutely absurd, and this schizophrenic structure of the academic world is limiting. And there are 3 forms of conventional scientific inconsistency. One coming from linear positivism, the line of neo-positivist Popper, where what counts is to master conventional objectivity, which has been critically scrutinized in recent decades. Theoretical rationalism, what counts is to theorize and intuit from experiences. And many times people that go to the qualitative side of science believe that doing that is transformative. We're going to show at the end of this presentation that we need to transform even the Cartesian qualitativism. And finally, the trend of pragmatism with the thinking of Dewey or Peirce. What counts, as they say, is to have good instruments, to obtain practical products, and to make them public. So this comes from where we were struggling to more and more stress the fact that we have to do a profound philosophical, methodological transformation of research and of action. When these myths are embodied in the university research centers and academic nuclei, they become imperceptibly or evidently part of serious problems of Cartesian linear knowledge. I reduce to these 4 elements those Cartesian, the elements of limiting, distorting Cartesian linear knowledge. Reductionism as a method, strategic ignorance, epistemicide, and the theories of causality, including the social determinants of health theory, which is causes of the causes reasoning, which is functional, which produces functional governance. And in this text, which I ask you to go over late afterwards, I have summarized what this reductionism implies, which is what I have been stating out in this moment. So Cartesian reductionism and determinism, I think I can use an example of this pandemic to show you what I mean with an example. Let's explain first what I mean in terms of in epidemiological terms, what Cartesian reductionism and determinism is, like the fundamental notions of linear conjunction and quantification of the parts. So first of all, we fragment reality in risk factors, risk factor A, B, and C, for instance, and we combine these risk factors in a causal web, where this causal web is the linking, the external linking, the typical reductionist method of fragmenting and then linking empirically and producing a mathematical model of, let's say, whatever model of factorial model or regression model, etc., to only describe the links of those factors and the probabilities of such relations. That is all we can do. This is typical reductionist inductive determinism. And pandemic is seen from this Cartesian model in a fashion like this. This is very simplistic, of course. There's a simple regression model that I have produced, like, for instance, X1 to 8 causes or risk factors, and they are put in a mathematical model to understand the frequency, probability, and shifts in trends of SARS-CoV-2. So we have it, for example, like this produces elements, like you say, what is the reasoning? That the important is X1. It's the factor, it is the partial, is the part of reality that we have to act in. This peak of the iceberg action, which says you have to act over viruses directly, that is all. And of course, all these other variables that you have to act over. Let's put the case of vaccines. It's vaccines. For instance, there's a very historical, very important production in terms of making visible the absurd way of considering that vaccines are the solution for everything. I am not let me explain to you, I'm not an anti-vaccine guy. I'm only explaining to you that we have to to make relative the role that elements, that functional elements like vaccine play. Like in the case of England and Wales, let me give you an example of the ignorance of underlying processes that this report showed. Like, for instance, if you put the trend from the 19th century to 1960 to the 20th century, and of the standardized average mortality rates, McCune found, and he had a prize for this, not only for tuberculosis but for every other, not only the mortality rates of tuberculosis but others. You know, there's a study, of course, and that a descent was in typhus was demonstrated before even the identification of the bacillus, and much before the chemotherapy was used. All this descent, this change, this shift, this profound shift of the presence of this disease, and vaccines came in the last moment. So this is not to say that vaccines are worthless, that we don't have to use them, but converting them in the panacea of in this pandemic is only part of this elaborated, constructed scientific ignorance to make the road to big business. And when you look at things, like, for instance, this study that was published in the European Journal of Epidemiology, where it found that increases in COVID-19 are unrelated to levels of vaccination across 68 countries and 2,947 counties of the United States. The correlations were not there. There was not this supposed direct relation. And of course, when you start understanding the profound and more complex multidimensional elements of the pandemic, you start understanding that microorganism viruses, their genome and dynamism are neither unique or even primarily molecular. Yet they're not uniquely molecular or primarily molecular. All these combinations and recombinations take part in ecosystems and social ecosystems that are being profoundly transformed in a way that they boost these consequences. So immunity is not a purely biological process, or something that immunology and critical genomics have corrected, of course. There is a social determination of the biological embodiments of this load, this viral load that penetrates in the human being, genetic recombination, induction of pathophysiological role of ACE2, macrophage activation syndromes, antiphospholipid syndrome, etc. All of them are socially determined process because the biological is not developing in a vacuum of social determination. The pandemic has not been understood as a complex multidimensional process because of that reasoning. And you find, when you see this graph, the big box is nature. The next smaller box inside it is society. The next box is the groups that make up society, particular groups, the general society, particular groups, and the individuals is the smaller box where the individual life with a personal, familial living style, practices, identities. So the pandemic, to be understood, has to be multidimensional because the nature is being transformed with these G1 processes, society's relation, regional, ample, or sub-regional relations are transformed. Communities and groups, modes of living, patterns, collective typical of exposure and vulnerability are changed. And the individual life plays, of course, is a reality that has to be studied and tackled. The individual problems have to be taken care of in the hospital or in the healthcare spaces. But of course, this is only a part. This individual action domain is only a part, which if it is falsely separated from what are the other dynamics that make the results that result in these personal, biological, psychological, genotype, phenotype embodiments. These individual living styles and the penetration of high viral load, comorbidities, etc., these embodiments cannot be disconnected. So the health field has been acting only in these elements, but concealing the complex socio-epidemiological processes that make transmission, like critical transmission and infectivity, critical process of policy construction and management, critical process of collective coping, critical process of ecosystem metabolism. All of these elements were out of the picture in most of the studies, in most of the policies that were installed in this emergency relation. So the social metrics of the pandemic, like the typical forms of capital accumulation in this 0.4 reality with a multiple crisis and interrelated catastrophic expressions was hidden. And this endemic or this combination of destructive processes of health in large scale was hidden. Two or more processes that interact were not understood. And we concentrated in viruses and antiviral medication, multiplication of syndemic ecosystems, dismantling of protective health in low variance styles, etc., etc. I won't go into that detail. What I want to make out is that the peak of the iceberg logic has become a means for strategic ignorance. Peak of the iceberg because if you see this metaphor of the iceberg and you see the visibility horizon, which is the peak of the iceberg, is what the health system sees, studies, combines as parts, as fragments, and description of those parts induces action over factors. Whereas all the explanation of the movement of those and the appearance of those elements, the integral action that is needed, let's say the determination of those processes is not understood. So Cartesian public health and the role of the hegemonic version and adds up to a strategic ignorance. Reporting without disclosing, reporting without mobilizing, isolated factors of the problem without to show the relationship with the processes and with the structural factors that generate them and with the corresponding eco-social systems, etc. So strategic ignorance and scientific illiteracy, I'm using the words in the case of strategic ignorance of Proctor and Schevinger of Stanford University that initiated the program of strategic ignorance in this important university. But what they are saying is, and what we were doing for many years in Latin America, many groups, was struggling against this scientific knowledge that modifies every time that there's that a progressive research center or independent research center finds these relations, the social determination of certain problems that imply risks, economical risks for a big company. The use of scientific knowledge is done to modify the horizon of scientific visibility. And it results in a form of scientific illiteracy, which is the concealment reproduced by academic sectors, which positions certain methodology, forms of objectivity, forms of constructing the subject of research, etc., which have to be changed. So the social determinants of health model is neo-causal, functionalist, is a neo-causal functionalist perspective. Uses nice words, probably inspired by Latin American studies that were 40 years before were stressed in Latin American research, but using and converting it into the same model. 3 books in Latin America have been written that analyze critically the debate between social determinants and social determination. And in my book, I explain it. I don't have time right now to do it, but in terms of defining the object of health, the subject of health action, and the praxis of and the action are looked upon differently from the social determination and the social determinants. Some colleagues have said that, okay, since it's a global thing that is installed in many ministries of health of the world, and the social determinants has produced certain nice effects and has helped us to stress the elements of even of social determination. Let's use them as complementary elements. I think it is. I don't agree with that. I might agree with that in terms of a very limited and very punctual moment of life where you can work up from the social determinants to a more integral view. But these are 2 standpoints. These are 2 practical standpoints, methodological standpoints, and philosophical standpoints completely different. Social determination, oops, I have there's a mistake here. Well, this is inverted. This is social determination. Social determination should say here, no? Okay, so please, this is a mistake in this graph. Okay, so we need a daring size of all voices. We need a paradigm that returns movement to the processes, reconnects the processes in multidimensionality, assumes complexity and the movement and contradictory movement of reality and connection, which explains, not just describes and predicts. Therefore, constitutes emancipatory understanding and praxis of all voices. And social medicine has been our foundational, our foundational precursors are in social medicine, both from the North, like say, all the works of Rudolf Virchow, Henri Sigris, George Rosen, etc., were very important for understanding that radical measures instead of simple palliatives have to be understood, that economics, culture, philosophy, arts, etc. are all part of health, and that historical transformation, socially determined conditions of public health have to be understood. But we also have precursors in the Latin American social medicine, like Salvador Allende in Chile, like Ricardo Paredes in Ecuador, like Ramon Carrillo in Argentina, only examples. and Salvador Allende with his Chilean socio-medical reality, or Ricardo Paredes with his study of the imperialist mining company in the 38, Gold and Blood in Portobello, and a very important epidemiological study of workers impacted by first multinational mega mining, or Ramon Carrillo with the synthetic public health plan for Argentina, etc. All of them have been foundation elements for our work. And of course, so we need to rethink ourselves. We need to transform our understanding, our way of researching. And we are glad that we're getting signals from the North, like this editorial by the general editor of the Lancet, which says, after reading our books, says we are trapped in a linguistic cage from which few of us can escape. We are comfortable in our epistemological prisons. If we break free, and he says, especially those of us who language in Anglophone confinement, if we break free, we are afforded an insight into a different world, one where the assumption, practices, and outcomes might be so completely different from our own that we can only marvel at our own parochial limitations. I was amazed of the profundity of this editorial and the sensitivity to the South. This signal of what we have lived with you guys, with you comrades, for many decades, but big science journals never took any importance. They gave any importance to Latin American production in Brazil, in Mexico, in Argentina, in Peru, in all South America, in Ecuador. And I think they're starting to listen to us. And I think this is wonderful because progressives from North and South science have to be together with the Asian, with the African, with all the voices of the world have to make a new science and understand health as a multidimensional process using complex thinking, which goes beyond the pharmacobiological model, the individual assistance and care, and Cartesian public health as a complex process and not as a result of risk factors. That means that we have to understand collective health, public health, and individual health as different dimensions, but not only what has been the dominant trend is to have part of a public health, which is which is strongly Cartesian, individual health that is only Cartesian, and no collective health that works about all the other elements that make part of health. Thinking about the complexity of health and the metacritical method is very important. And collective health is a complex process of social reproduction that encompasses all dimensions of reality. This graph, which you can go over later, is the connection of the society, the collectives and living modes of collectives, the individuals and lifestyles. We are used modes of living in the collective domain, and we use lifestyles individual domain, which in the embodiments that we have here, which are embodiments in the genotype, phenotype, in the Sikhism and the spirituality. But we have here collectives and living modes which are crossed by class, gender, ethno-racial relationships, modes of life with their patterns of exposure and vulnerability, and society where the rhythm and the movement is the social reproduction of accumulation of capital with its political and cultural relations. And in all these dimensions, then we have this metabolism with that that has been understood for many, many decades. A key element for the scientific transformation of the health sciences is redefining what is a plentiful wellness and healthy living condition. And we have proposed for that to use a metacritical methodology as an emancipatory tool of the paradigm of social determination. That substance is defined by the processes that underpin and reproduce life and healthy living. So the substance of health reform, of health struggle, and the substance to understand, which is made possible by this social determination approach, is, and the substance of plentiful wellness and healthy life It must be constructed, measured, and reinterpreted in the light of complementary analysis of the bioethical principles of healthy living addressed by critical epidemiology, and in the case of the Andean countries, the summa causae, ali causae of the Quechua indigenous peoples, their ecosophy, which is very important. So we say that the mode of social reproduction generates historically forms of sustainability, of sovereignty or not, of solidarity or not, of security, of biosecurity integral or not, sustainability or not, etc., which is where you have to put your eyes, because these four S's of life are: one, the capacity for present and future reproduction of life, the autonomy in the conduction of the way of life, the solidarity and organicity, of an equitable civilization, a protective logic of the common good and organic popular people's organization over strategic interests of capital, and the security of life. And all these four S's are systematically destroyed and degraded. And so when we approach this understanding, we use from the academic source these elements, but we study the indigenous proposal of what is a summa causae. Every culture has its definition of wellness, plentiful life, and healthy living. And this is what we learned from the indigenous peoples. So there's and of course, understanding that the social and the biological is profoundly intertwined, and that the genotype, the phenotype, the Sikhism, the spirituality, we would add, and the social are all embedded in social relations that give us the complete movement of this social biological relation of health. And the social determination of health is, as a complex dialectical movement, is precisely, can only be understood if science, research, and the logic of action is built in a participatory process, and which includes, we are based in Carlos Matu's triangle of action. When the project, the counter-hegemonic project, the project, and the group, the social block that has to be built, and the scientific and knowledge capacity, all is intercultural, all is participative, and all depend on each other. So to build a program in lines of incidence, to build an intercultural transdisciplinary social block of affected involved, to build and develop scientific production with metacritical research methodology, we have to have participatory science, which is not researching and then informing the community. Material, culture, and spiritual context, or basis for possible lifestyles and living, substantial differences in the way of life, hence patterns of exposure vulnerability are all intertwined. And we must distinguish between inequity and inequality. In Spanish, we distinguish between inequidad y desigualdad, because one is the structure that defines, the social historical structure that defines the profound differences of access to power to define the four S's, and the inequalities, the desigualdades in Spanish, are the effects, are the peak of the iceberg consequences of inequity. Many times this confusion doesn't allow us to understand. So we are using the metacritical concept that explains this link of forms of understanding of the academic and of the popular groups, of the social groups. The metacritical is because, to explain it, they have to get in profound dialectical relation to transcend, to transgress, and transform their original forms. This is a way to have a superior form of knowledge that is only the consequence of the intertwining. And the meta notion also implies methodology, because we are not in this discussion of quantitativism, qualitative versus quantitative research. That this is absurd. Reality is not qualitative or quantitative, is not absolutely qualitative or quantitative. It is our approach to understanding a reality that is both qualitative and quantitative, that we need to overcome the Cartesian reductionism of statistics as a meta and with meta inference, and of the conventional Cartesian anthropology, which uses narratives in a Cartesian way. We don't believe in mixed methods. What we believe is in the intertwining of qualitative and quantitative elements, like metacritical knowledge of description explanation with data that intertwines with description explanation with narratives. And this makes possible a construction of explanations, not only descriptions or possibilities, which is a metacriticism of knowledge. And instruments of metacriticism, we use a critical process matrix and a metacritical methodology. All this is explained in our book, so I don't have time round to stay in this, but we have instruments for doing that. The critical process matrix is a socially determined multidimensional instrument to understand all these complexity. We produce analytical nodes through this matrix. These nodes convoke evidences which are qualitative and quantitative always. And these nodes are connected because they make part of a process. They are not factors or clusters of variable clusters, arbitrary variable clusters that are dictated by mathematical procedures. We can use clustering, of course, but as dependent of this logic, which introduces the real elements of knowledge. And these nodes, paraphrasing Walter Benjamin's definition, are dialectic at rest. Those processes, because this is movement. This is not stable variables or stable factors. These are dialectics, movement, social movement. And these nodes capture the parts, segments. These nodes that we see here are captures of segments of movement that we intertwine in a logical way. So these nodes are out of meta inference and meta narrative. What provides meta narrative provides attribution, taxonomy, tendency, where inference and statistic provides regularities, variations, periodization, curves, cartographic distribution, whereas here we have sensual spatiality with corematics, which is a different, we have qualitative geography and quantitative geography. And out of this, we can design our research, articulating it not in an artificial, empirical manner, but out of this process of critical multiples. And all this is for action. So we have used this to discuss, for instance, the critical in a effort that we brought to the Congress of Ecuador for the production of agroecological and community family agriculture from big business, agro-business. In this struggle for a new law that protects the work of the small family and agricultural bit, we have defined the critical processes of that in terms of sustainability to develop policies and regulations. So, and we have done it with sovereignty, we have done it with solidarity, and we have done it with security. So it is a resource for planning, is a resource for research, is a research for action. And I will finish with this, comrades. Comrades who fight from Europe for peace, equity, and healthy living. You who also fight to return to humanity its original project centered on life and its protection, to rethink, as we do in the global South, what should not be the axis of a new, what should now be the axis of a new utopia. We all know that in these times, the advancement of collective health and healthy living is deeply tied to the urgency of transforming this decadent unipolar world into a new and just multipolar reality. We all long to banish economic imperialism, colonialism, racism, and patriarchy, which are the major keys to inequity in all its forms. But that leap, dear comrades, seen from the South, historically wronged and plundered by the empires that forged a world structurally incompatible with life inequity, cannot now become a new multipolar reproduction of the same, a simple change of oppressors. You Europeans, like us citizens of the South, in this historical scenario, we are losing control of our lives. Therefore, we must fight from all continents, from all peoples and cultures to bury this reign of accelerated and technologically sustained greed and open the only bioethical and politically valid horizon, which is to return the human project to its original foundations, working for planetary health, which will only be feasible by derailing the economy and politics of the principles of healthy living. These principles have merited various names in different cultures, but ultimately they can be summed up in four fundaments of life: sustainability, sovereignty, solidarity, and security. They are the canons that should mark the plans of government and the struggle of the peoples. Without the real validity of these principles embodied not only in the state plans and policies, but also in the governance of our academic spaces, we will continue to pave the way to new hells with illusory technocratic formulas. We will not pave the way to new hells and illusory technical formulas and populist distractions. I wish you every success in this conference with the deep respect of a South American who learned much from brilliant European women and men whose contributions also helped shape the struggle of my generation. Thank you for the honor of this participation.